So may I request now Dr. Sujata Baweja, Professor and Head of Department of Microbiology at Sion Hospital, to please make her presentation.
A very good evening to all. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible and your screen is well seen.
Thank you. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Renuka for giving me this opportunity to speak on such an important webinar. The topic given to me is colorful fungi, the microbiology of mucormycosis. Mucormycosis is a general term for infections caused by a group of filamentous fungi which belong to the class Glomeromyromycetes, which was called Zygomycetes before, subphylum Mucormycotina, and order Mucorales. The Mucorales, they're everywhere, they're ubiquitous. You can find them in decaying organic matter, soil, compost, animal excreta, name it, and you have them. Unlike what we all think, it is a Rhizopus species which is much more common compared to the mucor. In addition, we also have Cunningamella and Epophyzomyces species, which are very common in our country but not in other parts of the world. A minute before we go to the proper mucor, why the situation is so different in India? You see, even before the pandemic, mucormycosis was there, far more common in India than in any other country. And globally, what we had been seeing was the outbreak were there because of hospital linen, medication, or packed food. Diabetes had always been a risk factor for mucormycosis throughout the world. In fact, a recent summary of COVID-19 associated mucormycosis showed that 94% patients had diabetes and 67% patients had poor control of diabetes. One unpublished data from the PGI Chandigarh. In fact, PGI Chandigarh is a reference center for all fungal infections for the country. Between September and December, they collected data from 16 centers. And out of 287 cases of mucor, 187 were associated with COVID. And most of them were diagnosed after 8 days, and the median age for detection was 18 days. Since it's an LTMC experience, I wanted to share my data. The numbers may be very different than what we report, what samples we get, or what the cases are there. In fact, according to yesterday, one of the very reputed mycologists, the number of the cases presently in India of mucormycosis have already touched 12,000. We did have cases in 2018 and 19. However, in 2020, when there was a pandemic, the number of the cases were less. That time also 60% of the mucormycosis was in COVID positive patients. And presently also 65% of the mucormycosis cases are in COVID patients. How do we get this? These are fungi and they are sporangia, they are everywhere. And they get very easily aerosolized. So you can inhale them. They can get inoculated on any of your, in cases of like whenever there's any injury to the skin or mucous membrane, or you can ingest them either directly or indirectly. Madam has already elaborated about the risk factors. Besides the COVID or besides the other, neutropenic patients, even the chances of mucormycosis increases after we have catastrophic events like tsunami, hurricane, tornadoes. This increases. And it is not that mucor is uncommon in immunocompetent people also. All those patients with iron overload, such as hemochromatosis, or whenever there is a breach in surgery or mucosa, we are predisposed to this infection. And also patients who are on chelation therapy with desferrioxin on dialysis can get this infection. Basically, there is a relationship between the iron and the mucor. And iron is a great growth stimulant for mucorales. You see, how do they produce so much morbidity? It's simple fungus. How does it produce? It is basically because of its capacity to invade blood vessels, which produces thrombosis, infarction, and subsequently necrosis and diffuse inflammation. It also invades the perimural part of the body. That is how there is a numbness, which you can see in the slide. And that is how there is, and this black fungus actually is totally a misnomer. Because there's lots of necrosis, so what you see is it looks black. So that is how it has been called a black fungus. Otherwise, it is not. It does not look like that. The clinical presentations, are different, vary from rhinocerebral, sino-orbital to your cutaneous or ocular. Any part of the body can get infected. The cerebral or anything, even you can have disseminated mucormycosis. Now coming to the diagnosis, which is my main part which I have to cover. You see, like management of mucor is a team effort. It can't be one-sided approach. It has to be a three-pronged approach in diagnosis also. Nasal endoscopy, laboratory diagnosis, and radio imaging. Direct microscopy and culture play a very, very important role as far as the diagnosis is concerned. The mainstay of any laboratory diagnosis is an appropriate specimen. So the specimen has to be from the affected tissue. You can take a biopsy, otherwise, or CT guided. It could be any nasal discharge, crus, aspirate, whatever. And whenever you're collecting the swab, you have to take care. When you're collecting the specimen, you have to take care it is from the active side of the lesion and not from the necrotic side of the lesion, because you will see nothing. And swabs are never preferred. After collecting, the specimen has to be sent to the laboratory in a sterile container or in a saline at room temperature, never refrigerate. That is for microbiological processing, or in formalin for histopathology. I said the direct microscopy and culture play very important role. And direct microscopy gives you rapid presumptive diagnosis with a very high sensitivity. You can have both QH mount, or you can use fluorescent strain of microscopy using some fluorescent dye like chalcofluor white, which bind to the chitin, that is the cell wall of the fungus, which is going to float, and it's going to look like this. On the QH mount, you can see these broad ribbon-shaped non-septate hyphae with very, obtuse branching. They're very broad branching, and this is characteristic of these this fungi. I said again, it is 90% sensitive. On histopathology also, you can see non-septate hyphae with a wide angle branching, which is very characteristic again of mucorales. Normally, they are very well seen on his H&E stain, but at times you may need GMS or PAS stain, but normally it's not required because they're very well visualized in H&E stain. The second is culture. Culture in microbiology, or otherwise also, had always been a gold standard. But in this case, the sensitivity is not optimal. Only 1/3 or 1/2 of even those specimens which are microscopy positive grow on culture. Whenever a sample comes like this, what we do is we collect the sample is collected, we do both QH and chalcofluor staining, it's grown, then the microbiologist in the laboratory makes tease mount or does a slide culture and identifies this on the basis of the type of the sporangia, rhizoids, etc. Now, what is more important today is there something called Malditov. Malditov is a solution for rapid ID. It had been, in fact, a game changer for identification of microbes. It can identify most of the bacteria, mycobacteria, candida, and few of the mycelial fungi also. Now, what is important? Even if I give you a culture report, many a times it is not that if we grow in the culture, it signifies. The reason being, it is ubiquitous and it is also one of the common contaminant. So you have to correlate your culture findings always with clinical as well as with histopathological findings. And again, sensitivity is not much. It is only 1/3 of the cases. Normal cases, which are mucormycosis positive, will grow culture positive, and half of them, which are even smear positive, may not be culture positive. But still, the culture is very important because it allows you to identify the fungus and also to do the susceptible testing whenever needed. You never grow mucorales from a blood culture. You don't get it. It is either directly from the site, but never from the blood culture or from the bowel or urine or something like that. You never isolate these organisms. Few things for the microbiology. Yes, we have to use a proper media, appropriate media, but few of the fungi are microaerophilic, like Rhizopus or Cunningham. And few of the species which are very common in our country, like Epiphyomyces and Sarracenia, they do not sporulate on the routine media, so they require some nutrient-poor media. And the first report, in fact, came from Sion Hospital, and Dr. Uma Tendulkar, who was a past faculty in Sion Hospital Microbiology, had identified Sarracenia from Sion Hospital. Now, the other diagnostic modalities. Yes, we have already said histopathology is very important. You can see the characteristic angio invasion, perineural invasion, infarct, or necrosis. But many times it becomes very difficult for you to differentiate the Aspergillus hyphae or the Rhizopus hyphae. So in that case, what the pathologists do is they resort to immunohistochemistry, in which they use monoclonal antibodies against the rhizomucor to identify that. Galactomannan and beta-D-glucan had always been used. Galactomannan is specific for invasive aspergillosis. Beta-D-glucan is positive in many fungal infections, including Candida, but they are negative. Both are negative in mucormycosis. So they have an exclusion value. If they are negative, yes, and you are in doubt, you can think in terms of mucormycosis. As far as the molecular, everybody today wants to go to the molecular tests. Even molecular tests, as of today, are not even being done in the reference center, that is PGI Chandigarh. They are there. They are there, but they are only used in research labs. Still, they are standardizing. They show lots of cross-reactivity, and they cannot be used for the patient's diagnosis as of today. These are the limitations of molecular tests. Now, even the antifungal resistance, you see the standard methods for MIC are difficult to apply because it is a very rapid growing fungus. So there are no breakpoint assays which we have. There are no automated systems for doing the MIC. So MIC as such does not play a routine role in detecting the resistance of these fungi. But we all know they are intrinsically resistant to fluconazole, voriconazole, flucytosine, and echinocandins. The others, I'm sure Dr. Sudhir will be mentioning about this. Now, we all know, so many webinars and we're talking so much about it after the COVID. still we do not have a definite answer, but few of the explanations we might give. The mucor requires, you see, I said it grows well in the microaerophilic conditions. So we have hypoxia, high glucose. Yes, glucose is a great source of nutrient for this. Acidic medium, which is there in the metabolic acidosis as well as in diabetic ketoacidosis. The high iron level, we all know increased ferritin in the COVID patients, and immunodysregulation. COVID is known to produce immunodysregulation. So there is phagocytes play a very important role in initially controlling this infection, which is deranged when the COVID happens, and also maybe prolonged hospitalization with or without ventilators. Few things as far as the infection control is concerned. Yes, we have to limit the activities which have lots of aerosolization. Whenever there's a construction, demolition, renovation, or whenever you're doing the duct cleaning in our theaters and ICUs, they produce so many aerosols, and we all know they are ubiquitous. Definitely, the chances of you getting this are more for our patients also. And the patient-to-patient transmission is definitely very unlikely. We have no vaccine till now. As per the national guidelines, every patient who's admitted in the COVID ward should be wearing mask. But again, there are different views whether mask is the one who's going to protect. Yes, if you're using and changing mask every 6 hours or twice a day, it is going to be helpful. But if you are going to use the same mask for 2-3 days, it's going to be colonized with your spores and going to be detrimental for your health, and you may get mucor. The humidifiers, oxygen cylinders, there are different opinions. Some say yes, you see, it may grow in the humidifier water, but others say spores don't multiply in that. So there are different opinions as far as this is also concerned. These guidelines have come from the ICMR as well as National Task Force, which I'm sure everybody has seen. And I think that's it. These were my references. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baweja. And that was an absolutely elaborate talk. Thank you so much.